Anyway, what's up, guys? We're trying something different here. We're sitting down. I'm here with Logan Martz. We just got back from West Virginia like 2 to 3, that's not true, about 8-9 days ago. And yeah, so we finally came home, chilled out. He's been doing his thing, I've been doing my thing. He's been out scouting, I was out scouting. And yeah, now we just kind of want to like sit down, recap our trip to West Virginia, lessons learned. Yeah, just kind of what went on and the struggle that we went through trying to get on deer in late season in southern West Virginia with bows. And just kind of that whole thing. So basically how we're going to do this is we're just going to start off at the beginning of the trip. So Logan got there before I did, so I'll just let him give you guys a rundown of kind of what his first day was like first.
So we got there on the 15th of December. Our last day was actually of hunting was the 21st. But I got there at like 11 o'clock, was planning on just like scouting the first few days just to see what was there. And I think that's kind of like the best route is like scout first, don't just like go in somewhere plan to hunt unless you have some past history. So this is all brand new ground. Day one I went in, I got there at 11, hiked till about dark, about 5 or so. And right off the bat I parked, and instead of like driving all the way up the access road, there was like a little pull off right in the beginning, and I saw some tracks like going up. So I pulled off right there, started walking up just that road a little, and cut some tracks going up this like steep hillside. So I followed them up. There's fresh tracks there. Was walking along a power line, and like when I mean started up, it's like very vertical and steep terrain, up to 1800 feet elevation right off the bat. And I kicked a buck up pretty shortly, within like 100 yards of the car, a small one, by himself. Found some small rubs. Walked, I don't know, about 5 or 6 miles, and it was just a lot of like little, I mainly walked like a main ridge, which really wasn't that wide. It was basically a power line, and then there would be fingers off that main power line, and that was pretty much day one. Circled back around, found some fresh feeding sign and like a small saddle with oaks, and there were some beds there, and I just assumed right away there was some doe. Found a decent trail coming off that saddle, went down, and then like kind of looped it all the way back to the car. Pretty much right after that first scouting trip, I was like, I found a ton of rubs, probably almost 30. But day one, I was pretty disappointed with like the amount of deer I saw and sign and stuff like that. So he showed up a little late day one, but he'll pick it up from there.
Yeah, what's up, guys? So pretty much the way my day one went, got in super late. Thanks, appreciate it. Got in super late. I didn't get in until 2. I had a bunch of issues like with getting my license in West Virginia. Totally an oversight on my behalf. My license had actually expired, but since I'm out of state, it doesn't really matter being in the military. Long story short, I didn't get in because I had to go get a new license in PA and then come back to West Virginia. So I didn't get to the area we were hunting till like 2 o'clock. And then the issue I ran into was like access. So like the entire time we were down there, we were running into access issues. Yeah, West Virginia, like DNR has them marked on their map, but they don't exactly make sense with the way they're laid out on their like interactive map and how they actually are. So I drove around for a solid like hour just trying to find access. Logan had dropped me a pin of where he was, so I actually went to where he was, like just to see what the access points look like. Like, okay, there are yellow gates, but they're not right on the street. They're like tucked back up like alleyways. So that's the first thing I did, was just try to find access in this area. So finally I drove around for like an hour, and it really seemed like I was gonna have to go through someone's yard, and I just wasn't about it. So I'm playing on the map, and I eventually found a sliver on Onyx where the property lines like kind of look like they broke and there might be a road. So I went there, had to cross a creek, like drove across the creek, finally found an access, said no ATVs, even though the gate was open and it looked like people had been driving up it. I was like, okay, cool. But like my first impressions of getting there was like, man, this isn't a very low income like area. Like, no offense, but like that is a shit part of West Virginia. I've seen some beautiful places in West Virginia, but we were like definitely in like coal country, and yeah, it was rough. So I was like worried my truck was gonna get broken into the entire time. So I'm locking everything in my truck. I like stayed strapped the entire time we were there, but finally it was like 3 o'clock. I finally got boots on the ground, grabbed my bow, grabbed my pack, threw like 1 or 2 cameras in my bag, and just started hiking. And get up to the top of this ridge. My game plan was there was this one little saddle on the map that I was pretty pumped about. And I showed Logan it before we got there, and he's like, hey, there's a road that runs right through there. And we kind of learned that the roads don't necessarily mean anything just because there are so many old logging roads and like cart roads. They're everywhere. You cannot get away from them. So in our minds, we're kind of like, we need to get away from access, but there's a road going through here. Long story short, I go up there. There were some like fresher rubs. There was like a rub line running down this one old logging road. And right where the ridges came together and there was a saddle, there were like steep cliffs on either side. So I threw a camera up there, hiked up on top, and there were like quite a bit of fresh like acorn still on top of this ridge. I found like 2-3 good beds, and only 1 rub up top. But I sat there for like an hour and a half, and I was like chilling, waiting for something to come. The winds were kind of all, I don't know, that first day, at least where I was, the winds were kind of weird. They weren't very strong. I felt like they were only like 3 miles per hour coming over my back, and they were coming out of the east or the southeast. So I didn't feel like it was the predominant winds for the area. So most of the sign I was looking at was for a west wind, and it was just all weird. Anyway, so I dropped down, hang that camera, and as I'm walking out, probably like 60, 70 yards from where I hung that camera, I found this tank of a shed. Just absolute tank of a shed from last year. Been chewed on. And I knew nothing about sheds. So I pull into Walmart to meet up with Logan. I'm like, yo, check this thing out. He's like, yo, that's a tank. Like, it has good bases on it. And I'm like, how old is this thing? He's like, oh, it's only last year. It's still got some color down here on the bases, but yeah, it's pretty dope. So then that pretty much takes us to the end of our first day and our first night in the truck. So, I mean, I was great. The entire time we were there in the truck, I had no issues. But yeah, so Logan had scouted some stuff. We were feeling pretty solid for like the amount of time we had on day 1. But then going into day 2 that night, yeah, I think Logan had a little issue.
Yeah, sleeping situations. We slept in a Walmart parking lot. I was gonna sleep in my Crosstrek, but he was nice enough to let me sneak in to the back of his truck. He has a cap on his, and he had a 0-degree sleeping bag. I had just whatever my family had from back home. 2 sleeping bags. One's like a mummy bag, and the other one, I don't know, it's just like a normal sleeping bag. I laid the mummy bag down and then slept in the other one. I also had like a Fanatic jacket, which is like my warmest hunting jacket on, and 2 layers under that. And then I even like wore bibs. And I don't know if like I heard once that you're supposed to just sleep in a sleeping bag with just like base layers and not a bunch of stuff, because just the way the bags work with like body heat, it doesn't work effectively like that. I don't know. I woke up 4 or 5 times the first night, and we got a decent amount of sleep, like hours, but it was just like always broken up in the middle of the night. And also condensation was on the roof, and it was like occasionally like dripping down on our sleeping bags, at least on mine. It was a couple times. But other than that, I don't have really any complaints. He had a little buddy heater that he ran in the beginning, and then he turned it off. Going into day 2, we were forecasted, that was the 16th. We were forecasted rain pretty much all day, and that's what it ended up being. After day 1 and being pretty disappointed with like, I just had no understanding from Pennsylvania to like past the knowledge I learned here to there, that terrain I saw on day 1. I didn't know how to like transition that over, so I was like, scratch that place. I didn't really see any deer except for that small buck, and I just, even if I found deer, I felt like I wouldn't know how to hunt them. So then Day 2, it was like look for some flatter ground, and I looked on the maps and I already e-scouted a bunch of stuff down there, not knowing exactly what I was going to be up to. And so day 2, I looked for some flatter ground and a little bit more of diversity, like a little younger growth stuff, just based on onyx and some more mature timber. I knew late season food would be focus, or around here in Pennsylvania you kind of get more of a secondary rut, and I've seen even on public pieces here you can see scrape activity and not so much rubs, but at least they're still like hitting scrapes. And really I saw no active use of scrapes or no new real fresh rubs there. But back to day 2, looked at some flatter ground. Very pleased with that day. I hiked pretty much from, I don't know, I didn't get out there at first light, but it got light and I drove to the spot and hiked most of the day, probably till about 3 o'clock. So whatever the miles ended up being, I didn't keep that close of track, but I bumped 3 doe, and then a really nice buck I probably would have shot. He was right on a road. I was just looping around this hollow or bowl or whatever you want to call it on like a road that people have driven maybe, or like a tram road. It was mainly like gas pipelines.
Yeah. What was it, strip mines? Reclaimed strip mines?
Yeah, that was the one section, but all those pipes I think were like gas.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So there was those, and I was just like walking along one of them, and I bumped up a buck, and it was so quiet that day because it was raining so hard, and I thought either try to put a stock on him, wait for another wind, or maybe just sit there till the evening. But I was already wet at that point, and it wasn't warm necessarily, so I was like, scratch sitting here the whole time. I just freeze to death. So maybe he'll come back to bed in the morning, but the wind didn't really make sense for him to be watching that whole bottom like he was set up there. So I waited a couple days to go back to that spot. But it was good to see my first buck of the trip, and I found some good signs, some good beds, good rubs that day. And just trying to put the pieces together, I was like really pleased with like how that layout was and what I was seeing. So I was definitely going to focus on that area going forward in the trip. But that was pretty much my day. Yeah.
So like my day 2, we, like Logan said, we were out there pretty much at first light. Like I think we woke up at like 7. First light was literally 7:08, 7:09. So I think we were out there by like 7:40, 7:45. Hiking up this first ridge. So the one thing to like make note of, all the access points except one that we found starts at the very bottom of these ridges. So straight out the truck, it's at least an 800, because we'd start up that 800 foot elevation straight up to 1600 feet to be to the top of these ridges, or even to get on these like horizontal like logging roads, you're looking at least 400 to 600 feet. And like that kind of comes back into play later in the trip. We start making notes of these things that we're seeing, like feeding sign and feeding activity below that 1200 foot mark, or right around between 12 and 1400 feet is where we started seeing all this like active feeding. So not just feeding sign, but like physically seeing deer feeding at that like elevation. But my morning started off a little bit more exciting. Straight out the truck, was climbing this mountain, and I would say it was right around that 1200 foot mark. I was coming up this bowl and I hit this bench. There was a bench off to my right, and I didn't realize that at the time, but it was an oak bench, like 3-4 oak trees, oak trees. And I was hiking up there, and I was on this little cart road, real small, probably only 4 or 5 feet wide, real steep angle. And I actually came across a scrape that was not active, but it was still open, like there weren't any leaves in it or anything yet. And I'm just sitting there like thinking to myself, I'm like, why is there a scrape here on this angle? Because the cart road's like really steep. I just look off to my right, and boom, there's a body where, there's a silhouette of a deer over on this oak ridge, or oak finger bench, whatever you want to call it. And so I pull him up in the binos, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to shoot this buck. It's day 2, my first night. I find this tank of a shed, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to shoot this buck. we're gonna get into some monsters here.
And also, the night after my day one, I was so pessimistic after day one. Like, I got back to the car, and like, just when I saw day one, I was like, hiking up and down those hills, and just like I just had no idea what the heck was going on there. I was like, I'm just gonna shoot like, at first we were like, we're gonna shoot, wait for like a Pope and young deer, so. And because I tried to like research a little bit and talk to like other people that have hunted in some of the bow only counties. They hunted it during the rut, which I think would be a totally different story than going in late season. But after day one, I told him I'm shooting the first buck that walks in front of me. That's like basically besides a spike.
Yeah, that's
everybody
literally
that.
like.
So this is part of my fault.
Yeah, so this is what happened. So I'm like, I'm not gonna shoot that deer because like here I am, I'm riding like this high. I'm like, okay, we see like. Logan's reached out to people. We're on some big bucks of West Virginia pages. Like we're seeing monsters that are getting shot in these bow only counties, and like I'm like, okay, we found a good shed. I'm seeing the kind of deer and the caliber of deer getting taken in these counties. Like they've been bow only since the late 70s, right?
Yeah.
So like you can only imagine the kind of monsters that are living in these mountains, and like as you're driving in here, you're seeing like it's a shitty fucking area, okay? So like it's pretty safe to say most of these guys aren't archery hunters. Probably 95% of them are not bow hunters. So I'm like, okay, there's gonna be some monsters in here. Anyway, it's pouring. It's like almost silent when I'm coming up this hill, and I like see this deer. It's just feeding, and I like look at it through the binos, and I'm like, I'm not gonna shoot that buck. He's probably like just under 100 inches. But he's tall. He's like pretty tall, 6 point. No brows. But I'm like, I'm not going to shoot that buck. And then he just slowly kept feeding towards me. And I like range him. I'm like, okay, he's like 60 yards. I'm like, I'm not going to shoot that buck. And he keeps coming. And I'm like, all right, well, if he hits that, it'll be 33. And the next thing I know, he's going to feed right across in front of me at like 22 yards. And I'm like, I'm going to shoot this fucking buck. Especially after Logan's like, I'm shooting the first fucking thing. So in my mind, I'm like, all right, do I pass this buck? And then Logan shoots like, I don't know, 100 inch, 8 point today. And then Logan's like, all right, deuces. And I'm here another 7 days myself. I'm like, I'm going to whack this fucking buck. So I put a tree in between us because I think he's going to cross somewhere around that 37 yard range, 40 yard range. And I didn't really feel like taking it. It was uphill. It was going to be weird. I was like, man, it looks so much closer. But my rangefinder is telling me something different. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel comfortable like shooting uphill like that. So I was like, fuck it. So I put this giant maple tree in between us, or whatever the hell it was. And I like crawled over all this deadfall. It's all like covered in moss, so it's pretty silent. It's pouring. So I like crawl in there, and I get in. There's like a log down on my left, big maple in front of me. And I'm like looking at him, ranging him, looking at him, ranging. And he starts coming across above me, like 20 feet in elevation above me. And like 30 yards off, and he's gonna walk right down the cart road I originally was on. And he goes behind this tree. I come to full draw, and I'm watching him. And what I should have done is taken a knee or like kneeled when he did that, but I'm standing up or like postured up pretty good. And he like comes out and he sees me. He's broadside, but he's got like brushing like over his vitals, and I was like, I'm not desperate yet, so I'm like, I'm not gonna take that shot. So I'm like chilling, waiting. Like 3-4 minutes go, and I can just like feel my body starting to shake. I'm like, I'm not going to be able to make an accurate shot on this deer. I have to like draw down. So I finally let my bow down. He scampers off. He can't smell me at all, so I got the wind perfectly in my favor. Can't figure out what I am because I'm pretty low to the ground. But he starts circling me, and like at first I pull my camera out to film him because I'm like, I'm busted. He's not going to give me a shot. So I'm filming on my cell phone because pouring. I didn't bring the camera. And all of a sudden, I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to get a shot at this deer. So I put my phone down, and I like draw on him, and he's at like 37, and I'd ranged some stuff, and he had bounded right to about that 47 mark. And like, hindsight's 20/20. I should have just drew down, because he wasn't too creeped out by me, but his ass is above his head. He's downhill, facing uphill, and he's like 70 foot below me. So it was like right around that 50. So I should have just let down, spun my dial to 50 and redrawn. But instead I was like, I'm just going to, hold high on his like back slightly. And just like the way I touched it off and the way he was postured up. So like I saw the arrow go. I could have sworn it smacked a tree and I watched bark fly off and he just took off. I'm like, okay, cool. Clean miss. Shouldn't have taken the shot. Like, you know. And then I go down there and I started looking for my freaking arrow. I'm like, okay, this arrow's probably fucked. So I'm going in there looking for this arrow and all I see is like a tine sticking out of the leaves. And in my head, I'm like, holy shit, I am finding tons of sheds. That's the first thing that went through my head. I'm like, dude, I'm finding sheds left and right. No, it was not a shed. What had happened was I'd given this dude a haircut and taken part of his antler. So like, it would have been like this. And I just clipped him. Yeah, like this. It would have been like this and I clipped him perfect. And there's still like metal shards embedded in this antler.
Easily a 150.
Yeah, easily peeing wide. But anyway, long story short, arrow was fucked. I'm like, okay, let's just get back to what we're doing. I know he's not injured at all. He's probably just sleeping off a headache or something. He takes off. So I like hike up on this oak flat, start looking around, bump a doe that was like behind him because he was up there and he like looked back over his shoulder once. I'm like, there's probably another deer behind him. Never came out. It just turned out to be a doe. But then like Logan said, we just put some miles on that day. Looking around, he was kind of focused more on like the thick olive thickets for the day, right? You were checking out all that stuff. And I was hugging more so like the leeward side. So we had a wind out of the east that day. No, it was a south wind. That's right. That was the first day we had a south wind because you went back in there Saturday to hunt that buck on a south wind. And then we got 3 days of south winds. So that was the first day of south winds going into the trip. And I put on some miles. Apparently not as much as Logan did. Because at one point, I think it was like 11 o'clock in the morning. I was soaked to the fucking bone. I'd like come all the way down this ridge system. I think I had my tracks on. And I was like 1.8 miles from the truck on the way back. But I started running into like a lot of hunter sign. So I ran into a climber that was strapped to a tree, ran into a cell cam, then continued down this logging road, and Logan texted me, he's like, hey, I'm on my way back to the car. So right before he texted me that, I literally had put one stick on the tree, and I was soaked. I like stripped down, put on some dry clothes and socks, put one stick on the tree. Logan texted me and I was like, do I want to sit here? And I looked off to my left and there's a set of climbing sticks going up a tree. Like someone had just been here within the last month, and I was like, fuck this. It's pouring, I'm going back to the truck. So anyway, I got back to the truck around 1 o'clock, sometime there. He showed up like an hour and a half, 2 hours later. He ended up going on a nature walk. But so I personally bumped a lot of deer that day. Bumped that buck and doe in the morning, bumped a group of three does, and another doe, all right around that logging road height that was right between 1,400 and 1,200. It kind of like went up and down in that elevation, but it was always like right in that area. But that was pretty much it for day 2. We got pissed on. Logan saw that buck. I took a shot at a buck. So already, at this point, I'm feeling pretty good because we're going in. I haven't just been there 24 hours when I got out of the woods on day 2. Found a big shed the first day. Got a shot at the buck the second day. Meet up with Logan. He said he saw a good buck. Yeah. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, we're getting into bucks. It's gonna be a good trip. We're definitely gonna get some bone on the ground. Mm-hmm. That was my mindset coming out of day 2. It's gonna be a good time. So then, fast forward, we start eating out of the back of the truck. I got the propane burner going. I think that was day 1 of venison and rice, or day 2 of venison and rice. And we couldn't make it the whole time on venison and rice. We tried.
Yeah, I mean, it was like rainy. We just went out to eat that night because he didn't feel like cooking in the rain, and neither did I. We were both wet. We went to the laundromat just to like throw all of our shit in there and dry it out. But yeah, it was nice. We had at Chiefs, good food there. Highly recommend it. They have good rolls, almost as good as what?
Rolls are almost as good as Texas Roadhouse. They're just missing the butter. But Chiefs, shout out, thank you.
Yeah. So then day 3 would be December 17th. Another day I was planning on just like scouting, for the most part. And yes, you have to eventually end up hunting. But I had all my hunting, you know, I run a saddle, so I had my saddle, sticks, platform. And I went to a spot where he didn't intentionally, so on day one he drove up this road, which it shows at public, on Onyx, at public, there's public down to this property, but it looks like there's a road that goes up there. And so I drove up that road and he wasn't sure day one. I drove up that road. I drove past one house and it was kind of like a mowed field, but I drove past a house that says like no trespassing. They have a pool. There's like an obvious blacktop driveway to this house. I drove up this road and I wasn't 100% sure, and I think this is the right thing. Like, if anyone's unsure, I mean, if you could talk to the landowner, great, but I didn't see any vehicles, didn't see any lights. I didn't look like anyone was home, really. So I left a note on my car saying, hey, I didn't mean to like do any wrongdoing. I'm looking at Onyx Hunt app. I left my phone number. I was like, please contact me. If this is incorrect, I'll, you know, come back to my car and I'll leave and, you know, hopefully like cause no trouble there. I didn't mean any problems. So I left that note in my car, hike in there. There's a blind, there's a corn pile, there's another blind, there's a corn pile. And I wasn't even sure of the rules and regulations. Like, I looked at them prior to going there, and I even called the West Virginia DCNR on my way down, check like what we should be doing if we shoot a deer. And like that whole process, what about packing out, if that's okay, and like a couple different things on the way down. But I really wasn't sure about baiting. I wasn't planning on using any feed or anything like that. So I was actually like curious, like I Googled that, and yeah, it said on private you can have corn and bait. On any of the public land you really can't. Anyways, it just blew by that, walked up, went up on top of a ridge and walked that ridge out a ways. I probably only got like a mile and a half, and I bumped into like a little, it looked like 100 or so yards of just like thick briery stuff, and there was like some water and like a wetland area up on top at like 1,800 feet. And I figured it may be a limited resource. There was 4 rubs right there, some good trails, there was a transition, and this whole time, so that was my first setup. I kind of set up, there was a good intersection of trails, and I didn't want to walk that thick any further, assuming that there was some deer possibly bedded in there, because there was also like another big ridge that worked out. Here was the thick, here was like this ridge. I figured maybe they'll like loop back this way. Who knows? But some mildly fresh rubs there. I figured something might work through there. There was some acorns, and a guy had a camera and a stand like 200 yards away, and I figured, you know, locals, if they have, you know, tree stands there, maybe they probably know the area better than me, and maybe it's like a pretty decent area. There's a couple hundred yards off that. So I set up there for my first sit. Didn't end up seeing anything. You know, it was the right decision to just set up that early. You never really know. It could have happened, could have not. There was some fresh tracks there. It looked good. Maybe if I sat there in the morning, it would have been a different story. Who knows? But that was kind of an uneventful day. But anyways, while I was sitting there, and again, I packed in all that stuff, and I set up my platform like 4 inches off the ground, just that I'm not like rustling in the leaves. There was no trees. Any of the hunts I did there was absolutely no trees. I sat on the ground for every hunt, even though I packed in stuff. Sometimes, like I just said, I set up the platform right off the ground just so I have that silence and I'm not like making any extra noise. But as I'm sitting there, the landowner, I'm not going to mention any names, but the gentleman texted me, and at first was like, you're trespassing on my land, blah blah blah, you're scaring my wife, you don't have any right to be, you know, parked there, Onyx Hunt is wrong, yada yada yada. And then I'm like, oh, my apologies, do you want me to, you know, get down now? I just pretty much got set up. It was early. I mean, I was set up by maybe noon or something. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, do you want me to, you know, come back to the car? I will. And I certainly would have done that. And I was like, but I also kind of didn't want to leave right then since I just got set up. And I was like, do you mind if I stay and finish out the hunt? I assumed they were hunters since I passed like 3 blinds, trail cameras, tree stands, stuff like that. And he goes, bow hunters need to stick together and blah, blah, blah. It's all right, buddy. Finish out your hunt. Meet me down at the courthouse. I can show you maps and better access and this and that. So I was like, heck yeah. So very nice of him. That was like my first experience with, a resident of West Virginia. So props to him being a nice guy. And he did end up following through with that after that hunt. I didn't see anything that night. I headed down and got back to my car, and he was waiting for me at his house. Nice gentleman. He drove me around, showed me, 6 different points of access, and he is an avid shed hunter himself. He has like a wall that probably like a normal sized room would fill up like half of a room or something like that. I don't know. It was a good amount of sheds, and all big ones. And he was like, we find a lot of sheds in this area. There's big rubs, big trails. Super nice guy. And he was like inviting me down to shed hunt in the spring if you want to come back. He's like, I like to show what Logan County has to offer, and he was showing me a bunch of pictures he had like an album of deer shot in Logan County, which was super cool and very generous of that guy. He drove me around in his truck for a solid half an hour, 45 minutes, showing me different places. So props to that dude. And nice of the hunting community to like get along like that. A lot of times on social media, sometimes that all doesn't seem to be the way things are. But Logan carry out his day.
I just want to touch on I can't believe how nice this dude was, especially with us being out-of-state hunters. Like, a lot of the time, out-of-state hunters get a really bad rap.
And trespassing.
Yeah, and, like, let's not forget the trespassing thing. I was texting Logan, like, around noon, and he's like, yep, going to meet the landowner, parked on, private. And I was like, and, like, in my head, he was going somewhere different than he was. So I was like, how the hell? So in my mind, I'm like, how the hell is this going to work? And then, you good?
Yeah, bathroom.
Oh yeah, up the stairs, and then it'll be your second door on the left.
Okay.
All you. Anyway, so I'm like, dude, you're literally gonna have to hike all the way out, because in my mind, we had talked about him going somewhere else, and I was like, fuck that. That's a hell of a hike. Anyway, long story short, he had a great time. I'm glad that guy was so nice to us, and I mean, I didn't even meet the dude, but he helped me because he showed Logan a whole bunch of access, and the access is terrible in West Virginia as far as mapping, and kind of where we're hunting is a newer WMU, so that could also have something to do with it. But anyway, so my day 2, day 3, yeah, so I was actually going to the area where Logan started on the first day when he got in there and started hiking around, but I was gonna hike further out and get on a different ridge system, and I did that first light. So I was hiking up in first light, and I get to the top of this ridge, and it's kind of confusing. Like on Onyx, I was on public, but it kind of seemed like private, and the signs were really confusing. So I was trying to walk this logging road on the top, which on the map shows it's on public, but I was running into posted signs. So I was doing this thing where I was walking across the top of the ridge, have to drop down into a bowl to stay on the public, and then popping back up on the ridge, and then so I'd be on the public, and then I'd run into a posted sign, I'd drop down in the bowl and then be on public, and then it was very weird because the road, like the property line went like this across a straight road, so kind of a pain in the ass. So that kind of sucked. But anyway, I hiked all the freaking way out here, and I'm on this finger. We got a west wind, so it's exactly what I deemed in my mind is the predominant wind for the area. And I start cruising on out there, and I'm working on the leeward side. I'm just not getting into the sign I want to get into. So at this point, I'm like 2.5, 3 miles in, and I'm just not seeing sign. There's a lot of acorns, a lot of good food source, but there's just not that much deer sign. And so I make the decision that I'm gonna hike this ridge out, and I'm gonna drop down into the bottom. So 1,600 foot, down to 800 foot, back up to 1,600 foot, and I did it in about 35 minutes, and it was terrible. So at this point, I'm kind of double tapping. So Logan had already been in this area on the first day. So I hike all the way out this finger system, drop into the bottom, there's like kind of a pretty good rub line in the bottom as I'm dropping down in, and I start hiking up the ridge that Logan had scouted across the top on the first day. So I get up there, and it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So like everything we had like I've seen before in PA, because I grew up hunting in northern, like in Tioga County in PA, which is, you know, like hill country, like big hill country, kind of what we're in, except they have tops. West Virginia does not have tops in the area we're in. You go up 10 yards, top of the ridge, boom, straight back down the other side. But so that's the only difference. So I'm looking at benches on leeward sides, finger ridges, oak bent, like saddles. I'm looking at all that shit. On this particular ridge, there was none of the sign I expected to see. And, you know, a lot of the sign we are seeing is like 3-4 week old rut sign. But like, I mean, when your mind is trained to look for that shit, you can't help but like gravitate towards it. So we're really trying to like fight our urges here. But anyway, I drop down in, start hiking up the other side, not seeing shit, hating my life, basically just grinding. That like, cause down, up, down sucked. But so I get up there and I get on the edge of a power line, and on the leeward side of the ridge, there's a bowl, and the power lines are so deceiving there because I'm so used to in PA, power lines being straight, and the way power lines run, they run the tops of ridges or they run straight down over the other side. And these were like coming down into bowls and coming back out, and then down in another bowl, and then go out a finger, and it just wasn't what I was expecting. But anyway, leeward side of the ridge, top of a bowl, right where the power line came through, so it was like extra thick, got on like 2 good beds. One was definitely a buck bed, pretty fresh rub right in the bed on a tree that was about 5-6 inches in diameter. Yeah, I'll just throw it on the screen right now so you guys can see it. And so that was like the best sign I saw. Anyway, it's like going on 11. I wanted to be back to the truck. I had about 1.5 miles, 2-mile walk out. I wanted to be back to the truck and driving back over to where the camera was from the day before. Because Logan said he was going to sit for the afternoon. I was like, okay, I'm going to go with where I've seen the best sign and my best opportunity, at least in my mind. I'm going to go back to where I hung that camera, where I found that shed the first day. So I have like 45 minutes to get back to the truck. I'm like hauling ass across the top of this ridge. I'm on a fucking logging road, and I'm hitting like rub after rub after rub after rub. And I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, Logan said he came through here and he only saw like maybe 12 or 24 rubs. And I felt like I was like, at one point I hit a series of 7 rubs in like the same 20-30 yard patch. And I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of cool. It's probably all that buck that's, you know, bedding on top of this ridge system. And anyway, I get back to the truck, haul ass back over to the trailer park, basically, and get in there. And I know Logan hauled that freaking saddle around and like almost never used it. But when I'm hauling the fucking saddle, the sticks, and like if I'm going to be in the saddle and sticks, I'm hauling the camera arm. So like my ruck is easily 35 pounds, 40 pounds. And I'm just like, if I'm taking it in there, I don't give a shit. I'm getting in a fucking tree. Because it was such a pain in the ass to get in there with. So I hauled ass up that mountain, pull my camera on the way out, but I hiked back in there, put up a set. So I'd gotten on this old rub line. It was like a road or a logging road that busted off that main gravel road. And it looked like no one had been down in a while. But it was where the first like rub line I found on the first day was. Set up, climbing a tree, sit for like 3-4 hours. It's like, I think it was drizzling or something. It was like pissing on and off. So I was like putting the camera up, pulling the camera out, putting the camera up, pulling the camera out. But anyway, saw nothing. And then, so I pulled that camera, and man, I had like 4 bucks on it and 1 freaking tank on it. That I'm pretty sure, to this day, I swear, it is literally this buck, just a year older, and it has all the mass, giant buck. I'll throw the trail camera photos up on the screen right now. And Yeah, he was a good buck. So I showed it to Logan, and he's like, there's no fucking way we came down here, or you came down here, threw a camera up, because I was like...
I couldn't believe it, honestly.
It was a 36-hour camera pull, and like, he's like, how the fuck are you on a big buck already? And I'm like, dude, I don't know.
There's like 4 or 5 buck on
Yeah, there's 4 or 5 bucks. There was only like, yeah, it was one camera. I only put one camera out. It was like kind of a shot in the dark, and somehow there was 4 bucks on it. There's one giant on it, like 2 or 3 1.5-year-old bucks, and maybe 1 2.5-year-old buck that was really fucking ugly looking. He had one regular side, and then he had literally what looked like someone took a branch and shoved it in his head. He looked like he had Frosty the Snowman's head, like arms sticking out the side of his head. It was a straight beam, and it was weird looking. But I'm guessing he was probably a 2.5-year-old buck. But yeah, so I'm like jazzed up. Even though, here's day 3. I didn't see a single effing deer day 3. I don't know, did you see anything day 3? Like deer-wise?
No.
Yeah. So for me, this is day 1. It's on day 3, but it's the first day I didn't see a single freaking deer. First day I didn't see a single deer. Well, I didn't see anything the first day, but it's like the first day streak that I went on of not seeing a damn deer. And yeah, so that was pretty much my day 3. Hike out, meet up with Logan, show him the trail cam photos. And he's like, well, did you pull your camera? And I was like, no, I didn't. I left it. And he's like, well, now you got to go back there. I'm like, well, yeah, I kind of figured I would go back. There's a fucking buck there that's like pretty decent. Yeah. I mean, but the only thing to make note of, every single photo we had was nighttime. Yeah. 3-4 hours after dark, or 3 hours before dark, or 3 hours before light, or 3 hours after dark. And it was like pretty consistent that it was in that range. And yeah, so I left that camera, and then like Logan said that, and I was like, fuck, I do got to go back in there to get that camera, even if I don't feel like I can get on that buck, even though it was completely nocturnal. But we knew there was a big buck in the area, found this shed. So then my like gear started spinning. I'm like, okay, where could this buck be? Because, you know, they're in the area. There's deer in the area, there's bucks in the area, but no daylight movement. I mean, it is late season. They do tend to go a little nocturnal. So that was pretty much the end of our day 3. I mean, I had a bunch of things in my mind like going on. I'm feeling pretty confident though for not seeing a damn deer that day. I was really jazzed up after getting those trail cam photos. And yeah, I don't think anything else exciting happened day 3. I mean, we were grateful that he got some access, because that definitely led to day 4.
Day 4, is that when you walked that creek, Whitman Creek?
Yep, that's the day I went into Whitman. So
day 4, we were still, like he said, spinning his wheels. We weren't sure what to do yet. So day 4...
It's the 18th, right?
Yeah, the 18th, December 18th. And we were planning... So I was planning on finishing that scouting mission I was going to do the day before, when I only went like 1.5 miles. But I was going to start at a new access point from where that local guy told me to park, because it was only like a couple 100 yards, like 300-yard walk instead of 1.5 miles up to that exact same spot. So I parked, and I was possibly gonna do like a morning hunt, or just like start that like near where I was the day before, near that thicket, but just on the other end. But I decided not to, because he was gonna walk a creek out, like a creek bottom out. And the local guy said, you know, in this younger reclaimed strip mine, which is autumn olive, grassy areas. Again, it's just kind of like steep. You get like these, it would be steep, and then maybe flatten out, and steep, and flatten out, and steep, and flatten out. And it'd be some of those areas, or just be like a hillside. But it was younger stuff. Some of it you could glass, some you couldn't. But he was gonna walk that, and I was like, I'll check this like whole glassing thing out. We've watched the company Untamed on YouTube, and they do a lot of just like glassing bucks in these younger reclaimed strip mines, and then like just like a spot and stock hunt. So I was like, okay, maybe he'll bump something out of this creek. So I parked. It was well into daylight, and I just started walking right from the parking lot wasn't even 100 yards. Like I wasn't even like totally paying attention. I was just on like a road, and all of a sudden I was just kind of looking around. All of a sudden to the left, like I spot two heads staring at me 60 yards away. I'm like, oh, there's doe, and I bought a buck and 2 doe tag for this trip. And you can do that if you get the doe tags before the season starts. And so I knew like if you stop, typically a deer will bust out if it sees you, or even like if you're going through a thick area and you're just like motoring through it, they'll just lay there and just let you go by. But if you stop, a lot of times they'll get up and bust out. So I knew I couldn't stop, so I like kept walking and watching them and watching them as I go by, and I get past them far enough that I can see they're not really looking at me, and I like duck behind a rock, take off my backpack, and I'm like, and they were coming up this steep bank and they were gonna walk across that road I was, and there's like another steep shelf. So I was here and they were over here, so I walked up this steep bank and like over above them because I figured they'd just like work up this hill. And I was probably like, I'm not very familiar with spot and stock. I'm in PA. I hunt like big timber tracks. So it's probably a little noisy and just like did it all too quick. But I worked up, got up on top, and was trying to like see them because I saw they were like crossing. Because I was like peeking out from the rock on the bottom. Hiked up and around on top. I was kind of like looking for them, and I kind of was like crouched down there a little, seeing if I could just like hear them like working up towards me. And as I was sitting there, I could hear like stuff behind me. And I'm like, is there a deer behind me? I'm like looking, not seeing anything. And then I'm like focusing on these guys, and I'm like hearing it again. I'm like still looking behind me. It's like grassy stuff, and then there's like a steep bank up behind me, and I'm like trying to like peek up because I don't hear them. I don't know where they went. It looked like they were gonna like kind of like head up right towards me, but there was a bunch of like boulders along the bottom there, and all of a sudden I hear they like bust, not a lot, and come around down just below me, out of range, come down below me and kind of like stop and end their trot, and then they're gonna like start working up to me. I think because the wind was kind of blowing sideways, hit me in the cheek and going like that way, so they were maybe just trying to catch my wind. I don't really know, but they really wanted to get up this hillside, so they're working up towards me. I'm like, oh, so maybe get a shot, and the one's kind of too far away and kind of like trots up, gets to that bank and starts working up that bank. The other one's working a little bit slower. He was probably 50, 60 yards, but still not a shot I'm going to take, and I really couldn't get in on him close enough. And they get up on this hillside, and I'm watching them now on this hillside, and there's like another group of like, I was hearing something, and there was like 5 doe work on that steep bank, and I just wasn't like looking up high enough. So I saw 7 doe there. They worked up to another shelf, and I like dropped the pin up there. Maybe I'd like loop around and catch up with them later, because I was kind of loop around and try to glass that back side of this hill where he was going to be walking this creek out. Got over there, glassed a little, and I have some like old binoculars. I don't use binoculars where I hunt now in Pennsylvania. They were pretty shitty. Couldn't really see much. Didn't really find anything. Worked closer towards where Logan was, and walking that bottom. And I was sitting there. Didn't really glass up much of anything. Started hearing dogs barking behind me, and I was just kind of like looking around. Spent another hour there or so, and I was like, all right, if I'm gonna hunt this evening and like scout some, I need to get moving. Just about that time, 2 deer pop out of this little bottom, work up on this like really flat, easy to see. It looked like the green on a golf course practically. And I put the binos on them. 2 little buck. They were in no hurry. They were kind of sparring with each other a little bit, and kind of worked off into like a thick autumn olive patch. And I headed back to my car, ate lunch, and then picked up where I left off from the evening hunt on day 3, and walked some new ground. I found more sign there, and like big rubs, like multiple rubs, which you found like you bumped into later when we were hunting on a different day, but multiple big rubs. It was a saddle, very obvious. thick autumn olive on one end of the saddle, and it kind of like opens up, and there's just so much topography there, and a bunch of stuff happening at the other end. But good rubs. I think I have some pictures you can add to this to show you guys. And I ended up putting a cell cam, not that day, but another day in there to see what was going through there. I kind of figured it was all nocturnal stuff, mostly all rut sign. Nothing looked extremely fresh, but just the most sign I've seen the whole trip. So it was pretty good to see that and getting me motivated for another day. Did I hunt that night? Yeah, I did hunt that night. There was some stuff that I found, like a signpost rub on top of like tip of a finger, and I was kind of like just off. I didn't want to get too close into that thick stuff just because it's such a small top. I don't know, 40-50 yards wide I'd say, but it was thick, and there was a signpost rub that looked pretty fresh. And there was like a tram road, and as I walked up to that tram road, there was feed sign on that hillside. So I figured there'd be something in there. Sat there the last 3 hours of light or so. Didn't see another deer again. But Saturday was at south wind, so I was planning on hunting Saturday, where I bumped that buck on day 2, I think it was, because of the same wind. But didn't see any deer that night on day 4. And a little frustrated with that, but still I saw that buck sign. I was like, I gotta be getting close. Even if they're going through that area at night, they're maybe not using it. Maybe I'll like work a couple hundred yards off that saddle and some of this like thicker autumn olive stuff where I saw some fresh tracks. And even in PA Public, I was still hunting. I knew that all that was like old sign I was hunting, but there's a target buck I have that's, well, at least 4.5, probably 5.5 or older here in Pennsylvania, that I picked up his sheds in the same area that I've seen him chasing doe in November during the rut, and he winters in the same area that he ruts in, and it's like hard to like not forget that. That's like one of the older deers I've followed, and that I've been as closely as I followed here in Pennsylvania, like his core area I know pretty well. I know he ruts and winters in the same area with that, so I was kind of bringing that knowledge here, assuming that if I'm finding buck sign, there can't be bucks that far away. And just like he found on his cameras, even though it was nocturnal, there was some buck sign there, right?
Yeah, it was a good amount.
He found a shed. You know, that's why I was kind of like hunting that stuff, even knowing it was older sign. I knew they wouldn't be laying down fresh rubs late season, and they weren't touching the scrapes, but I felt like you gotta be somewhere. But I didn't see any deer that night, and he can recap his day 4.
Yeah, so day 4, like you said, I dropped down into this creek, Whitman Creek or whatever, this bottom, pretty much right at first light. Got down in there. It was really thick, olive thickets going down in on the ridges that were east facing, super thick. The west facing ridges weren't quite as thick. They're more like hard timber. I think it's just because they strip on the one side and not the other, and that's the change for the habitat change. But anyway, so in my mind, I'm like, okay, we got this thick shit on the left side of the creek, hardwood on the right, big transitions, old strip mine. So there's a bunch of topography features in here, like benches, like that are in these bowls that are stepped down for like water irrigation stuff. So I'm like, okay, cool. So I drop down in here, and there's a bunch of these like, they don't look like swamps on the map, but that's what they turned out to be down in the bottoms, kind of. At least the first one was definitely a swamp, so I didn't see much coming down in. Got down in the bottom. Some pretty good trails down in the bottom. But then I started running into a lot of hunting sign. So first bottom I dropped into that had like an opening on the map that looked kind of like a field. True stand camera. Immediately. Pretty obvious. I'm like, okay, cool. I work back down, like I'm working down in the second field, work up that one ridge on the thick side, run into a couple rubs, and then I ran into a rub on the side of a cart track or cart road, and I don't know how this deer reached this tree, because the cart road dropped off and it was way over here. Like Logan he ran into a rub that was similar, where the deer must have had to like reach to really get this rub. But anyway, he like had a pretty good rub line going down into the next one and into the next field in the bottom, and I ran into 4 or 5 rubs down in there, and then there was like a bunch of trails that converged right there, and there weren't any other people as far as like hunting sign right on that middle field. But yeah, so that was my game plan. Got down in there, saw a bunch of all these trails intersecting right in this corner. I was like, you know what? I got a camera. It's pretty easy access down in here as far as walking the road down. I was like, I'm going to throw a camera up here. Threw a camera up and left that. Kept working down the bottom. Hit the next one. And there were 2. There was no joke, a scrape that had just been worked. Within like the last 24 to 36 hours, there was a scrape there that had been worked. It was open. There were tracks in it. It had been drug out. I'm like, okay, cool. Deer are in this area. They're showing that late season, secondary post-rut, kind of where those 10% of does that didn't come into estrus during the primary rut are coming back in. They're still rutting in this area. I'm like, okay, cool. So I felt that I could hunt the rut sign pretty heavily in this area because I found that one open rub or scrape. Anyway, so kept working down, realized that the closer I stayed to that creek bottom and that creek, the more fresh or the more rut sign there was. And then you could see like repeating year after year rut sign. So if you know what a rub looks like that's 2-3 years old, you know how the trees heal and stuff like that, it's real easy to be like, okay, historically there are rub lines here, historically deer rut in this area, and they're just reusing those same rub lines. It's just common. So I was running into that, ran into one horizontal rub down there in the bottom, found a buck bed, like no joke, right down in the creek bottom against, the bed was backed up against like a 6-7 inch pine tree, rubbed like crazy, bed right underneath it, and then I worked down that bottom about 80 yards and ran into a huge bait pile. Huge. Like, someone had been dumping corn down in here. There were like 12, 13 pumpkins, 2-3 trail cameras, a ground blind. Looked like someone had taken a peanut butter jar and drilled like a hole through the lid or something and been hanging a peanut butter jar up. And it was funny because you could tell they had done it 2 or 3 times. Because there was like 2 or 3 old peanut butter jar lids that they had just busted off that were hanging out of this tree. So someone had been baiting in this area for years. So I took videos and pictures of the whole area, and we didn't end up doing anything with it, but it was way down in this bottom, and I was just like, I can't even, like, morally, I can't even hunt in this area, because like I felt like bad about hunting the area, and it's really a shame because that creek dead ended at a pond that was beautiful. There was like 8-9 rubs right on the edge of this pond, and I was just like, all right, I'm getting the fuck out of here. So I hiked up this ridge, got to the top to where it was all that old reclaimed strip mine, where it was like open but thick shit. It was like CRP on the edge of a mountain. And long story short, I ended up hiking all the way back to the truck. Got on like one area that had pretty good feed sign where it was torn up under some oaks. But I decided not to sit it. It was only like a couple spots. But anyway, I'll hike all the way down, get out to the truck, and I ended up pulling my groin or tweaking my groin on the way out. And I was hurting pretty bad. Every step I took, I could feel it in like the inside of my thigh. So I get back to the truck. I knew I had to like dump the truck out because it was a mess. I needed to go through everything. So I actually drove over to where Logan was parked up. I get up there, I like pull the burner out the stove. I'm like cooking venison. Trucks scattered all over the ground. I'm like cleaning up garbage, putting clothes away, all sorts of stuff because it's just been a train wreck, basically a yard sale. And a guy pulls up in an F-150, and I'm just like, hey, what's up, bud? Like, we start bullshitting, and I don't know what it was, but that guy he was like, I come out here almost every day. I didn't surprised to see this many people. I'm like, I'm not hunting, blah, blah, blah. One of my buddies is back up in there, but he's been here pretty much all day. And I don't know what it was, but running into that guy, I had like 2.5 hours before dark. I was like, fuck that, can't kill him from the truck. So I jumped in the truck, sped all the way back over to where I had that cam up, and I sat the night before, and I was like, okay, I got a theory. We got a west wind, so finally I have the wind that I'm looking for in order to hunt all that rut sign I've seen. So I get out of the truck, and I'm moving. I'm like boot scooting, boogieing up this hill, and I decide to like cut. I'm trying to like make up lost time. So rather than taking the road all the way up and then coming back, I'm like, well, I might be bumping these deer that are watching the access road, so I'm gonna take the worst possible fucking route up there. And I find this like steep bowl, and I just start hauling ass up this bowl, steep, and I'm like, you know, really getting after it. Got a pretty good sweat going, and I get up there to the top of this saddle. There's the main ridge, and I had sat about 400 yards down that ridge, and all the rut sign had like kind of come in a line this way. So my theory was there was a saddle here, and there was another point, but that point dead ended down into town. So I was like, maybe they're sitting up here, and it's just an overlook spot. Nobody's going there because it's surrounded by houses at the bottom. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get in the saddle. I get up there in the saddle, and it is just torn the hell up, like destroyed. I'm like, holy shit, this is good. So I'm getting all pumped up. I like planned on setting up on the ground. I box out a blind quick. There's some deadfall, so it was real quick. I set up, and I'm just sitting there for like an hour and a half, and I'm like, okay, cool. We're in the like prime time blast hour. All right, we got 30 minutes left. I'm gonna see deer any minute now. And like in my mind, I could just imagine like deer funneling around the edge of this ridge off to my left, or like deer coming from behind me down from the east or the west side of this ridge and like funneling down. And literally 10 minutes, 15 minutes before dark, I watch a whole flock of turkeys fly up down over the ridge and roost. And like that's when it clicks in my mind. I'm like, this is not deer sign. All this scratching is definitely turkeys in here ripping this up, feeding. So anyway, I sit to dark. Logan texts me. He's like, hey, I'm done for the night. I'll meet you at Walmart or something like that. I was like, all right, I'm going to get the fuck out of here. But in my head, I was like, you know what? I'm up here. I'm pulling that damn camera because I'm not coming back here. So I had 2 sits in a row, no deer, nothing on this ridge. I'm like, fuck this. I'm pulling my camera. I'm going to focus my energy somewhere else. So I run all the way down there to the end of this ridge where the saddle is, basically the base of this ridge. And what I didn't mention is the night before when I pulled that camera card, I had turned my camera 90 degrees because I could tell deer were coming through in front of the camera, but I couldn't tell which way they were coming from. I thought they were coming down the ridge I was on. So I turned the camera 90 degrees, and by doing that, what I discovered was I got another fucking tank on camera, and I'm pretty sure it's a different deer. It's like a monster. Well, my version of monster. Logan shoots monsters. I don't shoot monsters. So, like, to me, it's a fucking monster.
This is like a 130. This buck here, and that's probably what those were.
This is a tank for me. Okay,
yeah, those are big deer.
So it's coming. So like by turning it, I'm seeing okay, they're coming down the logging road. Because I get back, and the first thing Logan says when I say I got big bucks on cam, he goes, "What did you learn?" And I'm like, "They're coming down the logging road." So pretty much I could X off that whole end of the ridge. Because not a single buck came from that end of the ridge. They were all coming down this logging road. But I ended up pulling that fucking camera, and Logan goes, "Why'd you pull that camera?" And I was like, because I didn't really want to go back there, but now you're making me feel like I should have left that damn camera.
What hunt did you see that other animal? The little buck.
Oh, that's the next.
Shit.
That's the next day or 2 days later.
Right.
So I didn't see shit that day except the fucking turkeys. I hike out. Yeah, that's coming. I hike out, meet Logan, show him the new trail cam photos. I'm gawking over this deer, and yeah, that takes us right into day 6, day 5.
Day 5, December 19th. Okay, so again, like I said, plan is to go in there and hunt where that buck was getting in. Where he was bedded that one day on day 2 or whatever that was. And same wind pretty much, well, a little different, but still that south orientation blowing towards the north. Planning on getting, this is my first morning hunt, which I'm stoked about because I've killed like every deer in Pennsylvania but one in the morning as far as bucks go. So like mornings are my jam. And I don't know what it is. I think just my subconscious understands bedding concept a little bit more than feeding, I guess. Who knows? Anyways, I get in there, I'm hiking up in the morning and trying to get to this tram road that's way up there, like 1,400 feet, and I was just gonna like follow that kind of into this spot and then down, and then up a little side of a bank, trying to avoid like the deer movement through that like road area. And it was pretty grassy in there, and there were some pines, and I have everything packed in with me because I thought maybe there'd be a tree in there. But I got there, I woke up at like plenty early, 5:30 or something that morning, and I was planning on getting in there before daylight by like 30 minutes. But that hike was taking so much out of me in the morning. That was the first morning I think I went with thermals. He's been wearing thermals like the whole trip. My legs are always like plenty warm enough, but I was like, it's supposed to be pretty cold today, and eventually get up to like 50, but it was gonna be cold in the morning. I'm gonna wear thermals in here. I was just sweating like crazy, and I was like, all right, I cannot do this. I was just like dying. I was trying to go up the steepest side of this ridge for no reason really. I thought there was a road and it would just be easier to sneak around this ridge and then get up on the road. Didn't happen. Long story short, I stripped down and just went in my pants and got rid of the thermals. Like, I was just way too hot, and I just knew sweating would just make me freeze the rest of the day. So I lost the thermals, hiked in there, I was trying to enjoy it, even though I was just like pissed I was getting in there late and I couldn't do anything about it. Just to cover the distance, I was like trying to hurry but not go too fast, was sweating, and sun's coming up, and I busted like 3 doe. Now it's like gray light, busted 3 doe, still got another half mile to go. There's another doe like down over this hillside off this tram road, just feeding or something. She just kind of like looks up at me, and I just keep walking. I don't even care. Going after this buck, climb up this hill, and it's crunchy. I think it was like 27, 28 that morning. One of the colder mornings, but it was supposed to warm up in the daytime. Just super still. I was so noisy. Get in there, it's like 8:15, plenty of daylight. I'm like pissed. My dad's texting me, he's like, seeing any deer? I'm like, nope. I was like, do you know what you're hunting for out there? And he's like being a real jerk. But I was like, texting him my frustrations about that morning hike, and just as I hit send, I hear I hear something coming. I'm like, oh shit. So I like get my bow, and I've already like ranged some stuff. I have nothing over 20 yards I can shoot here, and there's like a road like down to stone on this side, and it's more like grassy on this side, and I have like a pine branch, a little pine tree here, and it's like grass. And I'm kind of like down. There's just a little dip there I'm down in. So I hear something coming, get my bow. I kind of hear they're coming on this side of me. I'm like adjusting, get my bow, and I like, just as I see them, I like draw back real slow. They're only at like 5 yards, and I like stand up real slow as the front one walks by me. And I don't even care that I was there for a buck. Like, this is the first deer I've seen like hunting there. So I'm shooting, there's this doe, pretty mature doe, like leading the crew. She gets by me, I already drawn, and I'm just like, gotta get a little high enough to make a shot over the grass here. And she kind of like catches me, moving, just getting up, and jumps away a few more yards. I mean, they were literally like 5 steps away. And she's quartering away, and she looks back at me, and I was just using my 20 pin, but I should have like put it lower on her. I pretty much spine her. She tips over right there, and she tips over right there, and I look to see what the other ones were in case there was like a buck coming. Not that it wouldn't have mattered. I was more just curious. Those 3 doe rip off that direction. I put another one in her, and she just dies in a few seconds then. Because I just walked up to her, made a good shot there, and I'm just super pumped up. Like, as much effort as Logan and I have been putting into this, like getting some meat in the cooler, I guess you could say, was pretty gratifying. And I was like shaking, so jacked up. Called a couple friends back home. I don't think I called you, but I texted you. I was like,
yeah, you texted me and then I called you.
Yeah, I was just so stoked, and she was like laying right there. But I only hunted there for like 30 minutes. It was 8:45 or something like that. So, and I bumped that buck at I think it was like 10 or 11. So I'm like, oh, I'll wait it out. It's still not supposed to get up till 50 till like later. I'll sit till, you know, it's still good temps. She can just like lay there. It's not a big deal. So I let her lay, sat there maybe another hour or so, and 2 more deer came in. I didn't really see what they were, but they blew and took off the other way. So I figured it's kind of like worthless to keep hunting there with her. I mean, I could see her from pretty much where I was sitting. And there was some more deer messing around like farther out on like a ridge. I could hear them like running back and forth as things were still frozen. But quartered her up, packed her out, and as I was walking out, I bumped 2 more doe not far away from where I just got her. So there's definitely like a concentration of deer. This isn't too far from where I bumped the 3 doe on day 2, and obviously the buck was like pretty much right where I was set up. So definitely a concentration of deer there. And that went into our discussion later that night. I'm like, dude, you gotta, I mean, not that I knew what I was doing exactly, but if there's deer there, you would assume there would be some bucks for whatever reason. There's food there, there's good winter cover or whatever. Who knows what all the reasons were, but I was like, dude, you should be hunting over there. I saw a bunch of deer, like I don't know how many, so I saw 3, 4, those 4, almost like a dozen deer over that same area. Just that morning, I was like, you should hunt over there like that next day. But I packed her out, and yeah, not too much else there. I was super stoked and ready to go for the next 2 more days of the hunt.
Yeah.
But that was the night. Good to get some meat in the freezer, and yeah, I was super happy.
I'll tell you what, I've never had a pain in the, like, never had trouble keeping a deer cold, but we had trouble keeping your deer cold. Like, could not get that meat down to temp. Like, to actually chill off. I think it was what?
It was
the next morning,
day,
and you're like, feel this, and I'm like, man, it still doesn't feel that cold yet.
No.
You dumped another bag of ice on it, and it finally chilled off, but I don't know why it took so long to cool down like that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so pretty much this is day 5, right? We're talking about?
Yep, day 5.
So day 5, I went back in that freaking bottom, Whitman Creek area, like hunted the very north end of it pretty much. So that bait shit's like 3/4 of a mile, half mile down the ridge. I'm like, not even fucking with it. I really just want to go back there to get my damn camera back. Because Logan had me so pumped up after that camera pull the night before. We're like talking about bucks. He's like, okay, cool. So now you know he's coming down there. Now, if you can figure out where he's going. So I'm all pumped up. Logan's got me jacked to like hunt this one deer. I'm like, I'm going to figure the fucker out. Like, so I'm like, I got 3 days, whatever's left. I'm like, I'm going to figure this guy out. And I was just like way too naive. Like thinking that I could do it in like 2 days, like pattern this buck and like possibly get on him. But anyway, so I went down there in the morning, sat there for like 2 hours, and I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? I literally just walked this whole bottom out the day before, up and down ridges on both sides, like, there ain't gonna be shit in here. And like, obviously I pull my camera, nothing on it, like, go figure. So I like pull out all my cameras. I've only put out like 1 at a time this whole trip, but I got like 4 or 5 with me. So like, I'm like, fuck this. I get back to the truck, check my phone because I have no service in the bottom. I see Logan says doe down. I'm like, sick, finally. We're not leaving this state with nothing. So I call Logan, I'm talking to him, he's telling me the story. I'm like, that's awesome. And I'm like, I'm going back over to that area you fucking hate that you think is worthless.
That's day 1. You still hunt where you just get all these bucks is where I was like, day 1, I was like, screw this place. I'm shooting the first deer. Like, I was not going back to that place.
Yeah, I was just like, Logan had got me so pumped up about like trying to kill like a singular deer, and like, you know what else?
Oh, you're blaming me for
it's
this?
Logan, and I've been listening to fucking WCB, Working Class Bow Hunters, and listening to like Austin Chandler and those guys talking about like killing like a specific buck. So I'm like, I'm all jazzed up. Like, I'm gonna get on this fucker. Like, I'm gonna figure this deer out. So I had like e-scouted it all morning while I'm sitting there for 2 hours, like trying to figure out. I'm like, okay, here's a bench. Here's a bench. Here's a pinch point. Here's where a bowl meets the power lines, like that other bed I found over here. So I'm getting all jazzed up. So I get out of there. I get over to the other spot by like 11, and I'm like, cool. I'm gonna scout in, hang some cameras on the way. There's a few benches I want to check out, a couple pinch points, and I start working in there, and I hit that first oak bench because there was 2 ways I wanted to go in. I either wanted to go in the normal route up the trail, kick over top, and check out this oak bench and see what the feed sign looked like, or I wanted to come up that trail, immediately drop in a bottom, and then have an 800-foot climb out of the bottom right behind some private. And there were like guys down in their yard, and I don't know, I felt like I was kind of intruding because I don't really know where the property lines are, which we ran into with Logan earlier in the week, where Onyx said it was good to go, but it was private. So I was like, I don't really want to run into that, especially when they're in their yard. So I was like, okay, cool, like fuck that, I'll go all the way up the top. And I hit that first oak bench, and like, you know, it's pretty scratched up, and I'm like, okay, this could be turkeys, but I'm not sure. I'm like, this looks good, I should sit this. And then I was like, nah, fuck it, I'm gonna keep going, because we got a south wind, so I could have set up on it. So I work out of this bench up onto the actual ridge, and then I'm finding like actual deer feeding sign. I'm like, oh, this is what it looks like. I'm like, here this whole time I've been writing this turkey scratching off as deer feeding sign, but this is clearly deer. And I'm like, okay, it looks a little different. It's not like you get as high berms with the leaves as you do with turkeys. It's a little more mellow. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain without visuals. But I'm like, okay, this is clearly deer. It's not quite the same.
Usually like deer scat or
yeah,
in it or something.
Yeah, it was just.
Did you see any of that?
Yeah, it was like you could tell it was different. Like the turkeys, it almost seemed like they were scratching like circles right on top of one another, like almost touching. And this deer sign's a little more spread out, and there were like some that had hoof prints in them and stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. Like this is what it's supposed to look like. So I'm like, okay, this could be good, but I feel like I kind of already blew this whole basin out by getting up here. So I'm like, I'm going to work up to the power line. So I work up to the power lines. I get on some like fresh stuff. It's only a couple like areas that are scratched up. I'm like, okay, this probably isn't turkeys. Because if this was a turkey, it'd be like 1 or 2 singular turkeys. And I know they're flocked up in the fall. So I'm like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to set up here so I can shoot this. I'm going to set up here so I can shoot to the left, shoot to the right. There's a really good trail that comes right through here. And there's acorns galore. Well, my freaking ADD self, I don't have ADD, but I'm like, what about if I just go look at the power line? So I like creep up there to the power line. And you should always be able to shoot the last place you stand. And then the next thing I know, I'm like out in the power line. Then I'm walking up the power line. I'm walking down the power line. Then I'm like, maybe I should just go back to where I was originally. So I sit, like I go walk all this shit, and then I go right back. I'm like, I'm sitting there, I like climb up in the saddle, and I'm like chilling for like an hour, and I'm like, this is fucking worthless. I haven't even hung a single camera. I didn't get to where I wanted to scout. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I was just getting frustrated with myself. And about an hour goes by, and there's like 2 hours before dark, and all of a sudden I like kind of hear something off to my side, and I'm like looking around the tree, and there's this fucking kitten sitting down there on the trail, and I'm like, how the hell did a house cat get all that way back here? I'm like, how did that thing not get murked by a coyote or something? And then I started looking at it, I'm like, holy shit, that's a little bobcat. Like, little bobcat, like a kitten, like, must have just left the litter or something, or whatever the hell cats have. Anyway, so like, I'm like filming this like tiny bobcat, and I'm like, I couldn't even bring myself to want to shoot this thing. It was so cute and like small. It was like the size of a cottontail. And it's just, you know, creeping down the trail, doing its thing, just chilling, licking itself a little, creeping down the trail, and I'm like, huh, well, I guess that was worth it. I don't know. I hiked this 40-pound ruck all the way up here. Oh, I was.
He told me this at night. I was just like laughing.
Dude, he just like laughing at me. But anyway, so I'm like, fuck this. So, you know, it gets dark. I pull the set. I'm hiking out, kind of hauling ass. And I hang all 4 cameras like within 200 yards of each other. I'm like, you know what? If this buck is walking this way, there's no way I'm going to miss him. So I get on that oak bench, 2 stealth cams, either direction. I'm like, if anything walks down this bench, I'm getting it. And then I like drop down off the side towards where I was going. There's a really well-used trail, like going horizontally along this ridge. Put a cam there, drop down, and on this walk-in, I'd actually found an open scrape too. And it was kind of cool, so I throw a camera on that, and like, you know what, I'm just running out of place to put this damn camera. I'm like, if the buck walks past this, I have a better idea. And then if he walks up over the bench, I'll have a pretty good idea which direction he's going. So I have 4 cams out in like 200 yards. I get the fuck out of there. I'm really just pissed off. And like I didn't get to the parts I wanted, but I didn't want to walk past good hot sign. What I felt was hot sign for the time of year it was. And that's what I felt like this was. It was like condensed, you know, like super small area, super fresh, like 24-hour feed sign. And there were acorns galore. I was like, I feel like I'm in a good spot. I'm just going to sit it. And I guess where I made the mistake was I should have like pushed past that a little. Like, I mean, I'm glad I didn't set up on the Oak Ridge because I would have been real pissed. But like, I feel like I should have just gone a little further. Actually used that to do my scouting because I had 2 more days. So I could have gone through there, scouted that, left to go a day, and then come back in and hunted the hottest stuff or what would have been the most promising stuff. And I just didn't get to where I wanted to do. So that was the end of my day 5. Nothing. That's my 3rd day without seeing a single deer. So I'm getting kind of pissed off. And I remember getting back to the truck and Logan being like, man, this is hard fucking hunting. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, how you feeling? And I'm like, dude, the only thing that's keeping me here is no one else is fucking out here doing this shit. I'm like, that's just my mindset. Like, I love doing shit that nobody else is willing to do. Because, like, I see it all the time. Like, I got some buddies that hunt, but they're fair weather hunters. If it's slightly uncomfortable, they're not fucking doing it. And like that's just what keeps me going because other people aren't doing it. Like I don't know anyone else who's sleeping in the bed of a truck outside a Walmart parking lot almost every night below freezing for 7 days straight. Hadn't showered in 7 days. We were bouncing back and forth whether or not brushing our teeth was good luck or not.
And I didn't brush my teeth that night before. I killed that doe and I brushed them every night after that.
And that's why we didn't kill anything.
And also I put my cell cam, my Axis Render cell cam out that day after I shot my doe. I kind of washed up. I just had like body wipes, washed up, got some ice on the meat, and then dropped off that cell cam quick to like the last hour of daylight. Up in that saddle, I found that one day where there was like a bunch of big buck sign, assuming that a nice buck would walk through there. And then that next morning, he and I went into that saddle.
I took Logan's advice. I went over and hunted where he told me to hunt.
Yeah, this is kind of, I mean, it's kind of
same ridge system, right?
Yeah, same general area. But I wasn't, yeah, it's close. I mean, it was like half a mile or more away. But anyways, I tucked back away from that saddle where I had that cell cam, 300-400 yards. I mean, it was, I walked that ridge system already. It was super thick autumn olives. There was trail just on the outside of the autumn olive, and then there was like a subtle saddle on the one side. And I crawled through the autumn olive like hands and knees, getting to that farther side just because I figured there was like a big bowl and it was like a big bottom on that other side, and I figured there's been maybe less pressure through the season on that other side, and there were some fresh tracks there. I assume just mainly doe, and there were some nice rubs in that area, not that I could see physically from where I was sitting, but I figured things would just be transitioning through there. Again, I didn't pack my stuff in that time, but I sat there and he sat up on a finger, like a little part of a ridge.
I was pretty much on the other side, so I ended up setting up, not knowing to me.
Not in the saddle, but there was kind of like a ridge or point off from
yeah, exactly. And it was actually where Logan was finding all those really big rubs, but I didn't know that's where it was because I remember finding them that morning and being like, dude, check these out. I was like, dude, those were the ones I showed you like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, fuck.
But, so we were sitting there. He didn't see anything right in the beginning, and then I was like gonna walk his direction to head to like a different location. So I figured, maybe I'll bump something to him. Not that I'm pro doing deer drives, but a light bump like that wouldn't hurt us. We're getting a little desperate here at the last trip. So I just and I didn't scout this area, so I kind of walked the backside, and I saw like a doe kind of run his direction, like a head go that way, and bumped 2 deer that were below me. They bumped off down like further away from me, and I found like a deer carcass somebody probably shot in the fall. I mean, it was like clean. There was no head. I assume maybe a buck, since there was no head. and kind of worked back to another location. Where did I set up that evening? I think it was.
Weren't you? You were back over kind of where you shot your doe.
Yeah,
in that general direction.
There was a couple rubs and like a thick top and a couple nice rubs, and I was gonna work. Oh yeah. So there's like 2 rubs coming off this point, and it was thick up there, and I worked back that bottom of that ridge because it was pretty steep and thick, and I was just looking for a trail coming off that thicker stuff across the trim road down to like oaks were lower. They weren't really up top. They were about 1,200 feet and lower, most of them, and that's where we found most of the feeding signs. So I was looking for a trail off the thicker stuff, crossing the tram road and down, and I knew where those rubs were, so I was kind of working that, and then I worked to where the tram road kind of like stopped, but I could still work around that thick top, so I was just working that edge. There's a lot of fresh tracks there. It was wetter there, so I had to take that into account because the tracks would last a little longer than if it was dry ground. But it looked like I was seeing where I was stepping, I was seeing tracks, and it looked super fresh. And just so I was getting to a spot that there was not water, but it looked like there was a trail coming off the top, and there was a rub or 2 there. Actually, there was like almost 4, which I don't have pictures of, but they were pretty decent sized. And there was some briars, and I figured a lot of people wouldn't be walking through that stuff. I was like ripping through them, beating up my gear. Got to a spot, and just as I was about getting ready to set up, I was like marking it on Onyx, like some good sign, like this is like a little hidey hole type spot. And just about that time, a couple does bust below me. And anyways, I set up there, and it's probably 200 yards off the top. Again, I didn't want to like push up into that thick stuff just because of blowing it out. Wind was pretty good for me. Waited there, and there was kind of a bowl below me, oaks down below me, and I could just hear like the whole time I was sitting there, I could just hear squirrels just chirping the whole time about I don't know if there's deer down in that bottom feeding and scratching and just like irritating those squirrels a lot. I mean, if they see you moving around, they'll typically chirp at you. So I figured something was going on down there that I couldn't see. But again, a night no-show. That day was like a no-show as far as deer when actually hunting. Last day, and I was thinking, what am I going to do for the last day? But again, no-show. I mean, it was consistent that we were seeing deer, at least I was, pretty much every day scouting. I was seeing doe. I think there's a pretty decent deer population there.
Yeah, definitely in that area.
Yeah, I don't know about everywhere else, like where Logan's been beating his head against the wall, but over there in that section, there was a decent amount of deer, and you can go on with your...
But yeah, so day 6?
Yep.
Right? Yeah. Sorry, I keep forgetting, but geez, the days, like, I'm really trying to remember what the fuck I did from day to day, because it does, like, kind of blend together, because I went 3 days without seeing a damn deer. So, like, those 3 days, I'm really struggling to put together. So, day 6, I'm like, please, Lord, let me see, like, I don't even need to, like, shoot a deer. I don't need to see a deer. Just let me bump a fucking deer walking in the dark. So, anyway... Logan's on one side of this ridge system. I come in on the other side, and I do. Immediately, I'm coming up what is supposed to be a logging road on the map. Turns out it was like a pipeline or a pipe that ran up, and it was just super thick briar patch. And, I get up, and I'm like 150, I walk up the main trail. Then I realize it's this pipeline. I get like 2/3 of the way up. I go to climb under a log, and I pull my pack off and realize, like, my jacket that's, like, strapped to the outside of my bag isn't there. So I have to walk back down, like, 300 yards. Yeah, dude, I had to walk 300 yards back down this thing. I find it. I'm pissed off. Shouldn't have worn thermals in, which I would do it every day, and I'd be pissed about doing it every single day. Wearing thermals in.
I stopped doing it after the day I shot my doe. I was like, nope.
But I continued to do it. I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to do it. So anyway, I get up in there. I bump a deer. Well, I bump some does coming. I don't know what they are. I bump some deer in the dark. And then I get up to about where I want to be. And I start getting a little greedy. Not going to lie. Because I'm setting up in the dark. I've never been in the area. So I have no idea what the hell's around me. I'm looking at Onyx. But I can't really see yet. I'm not trying to shine everything with white light. You know, I'm like cupping my flashlight. Keeping it close to the ground. And I pick a tree that kind of offered some... I mean, for guys that don't hunt on the ground, what you really need is a tree that's bigger than you as far as width, or you need some horizontal cover, but preferably...
Front and back.
Yeah. Well, I tend not to run too much on the front of me, at least this year. I mean, I got it done this year. I had 2 bucks walk by. It's, 7 to 10 yards, no cover in front of me. But you need that horizontal cover, like, behind you at least. Otherwise, yeah, you definitely need some thinner stuff in front of you or like a really wide tree. So that's what I was looking for. I found one tree that kind of split, and then I was like, damn. I'm pretty sure, because Logan was telling me it was all thick on top. So I'm like, I'm going to go a little bit higher so I can see over top. And I picked a tree a little bit higher. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to go one more tree up. And when I did that, I totally hit, something blew out right next to me about 50, 60 yards to my right. And then at first daylight, Logan sends me a trail cam photo of a buck that ran by at 6:30, which is exactly the fucking time I heard that deer blow out. So I'm pretty sure I blew this buck that was, I don't know if he was bedding, eating, because I walked right through there and there was some like feeding sign in that area. Whatever, it was right there, like 70 yards to my right. And I just kept creeping up enough that I skylined myself that this thing saw me in the early morning light, or like, I think I just... because I was hunting an off wind, a very slight off wind. I think by going up 10 yards, 15 yards more on the ridge, blew him out. And then he sent me that freaking trail cam photo, and I was sick to my stomach because I'm pretty sure I blew that buck right out the top, ran right by the camera, and I would have definitely whacked him, especially after this incident. I would have shot him on anything going into day 5 or day 6 with not seeing deer the past 3 days. So that was my morning. I did a lot of walking. Like Logan said, he pushed some deer to me. I ended up seeing 3 does. Pretty sure that it was a result of his deer drive or something.
And I honestly don't think it was, because on the cell cam, I had it just sending it to me like the immediate time that I took the picture, which was 6:30. And when I checked it a little after that, but then at 10:30 or something, there was just 3 doe feeding right in front of that camera, just like casually. They weren't really running through.
I don't know then. But regardless, the rest of that day, Logan walked over to a different section, and I kind of took a really roundabout way to where I wanted to go. I wanted to hunt a bottom on a west-facing ridge, but it was old. You could tell that it had been fucked with. It was benches down in this hollow, and it definitely was man-made. But on the map, I was looking at it, it was all pines down in this bottom. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm thinking thermal cover, all this other shit, like way out of the way. And you have to like, one, there's no easy way to access it from the bottom. So anyone who hunts that down there has to drop, one has to hike in from a different access point. So 800 foot up, 8 to 600 feet up, walk this access trail in, drop 600 foot into the bottom, hunt the bottom, and then it is going to have to hike 600 foot out of the bottom. I'm talking about hiking. Hike 600 foot out of the bottom at night. So I'm like, okay, this is cool. This, like Logan said, we talked about it. He's like, dude, people probably don't go down there. So I ended up creeping down in there, and I was so close to the bottom, probably 40 yards from the bottom. And I fucked up and put my weight on a pretty large tree that was down and snapped a limb on it, and all these tails just get up and blow out of this freaking bottom. And I'm like, man, this fucking blows. I was like, well, I already kicked them all out. I'm going to go down here. I was only 40 foot from the bottom. Get down in there, and it is some primo bedding cover. It's pines, like high pines that you couldn't walk under, you could crouch under. Like, they were 4 foot up, the bottom of the limbs, and it was like all switchgrass and shit under it. It looked awesome. And of course, I'm looking around as soon as I get down in there, and I found a cut limb, and I'm like, who the hell is in here cutting limbs? I started looking around, tree stand right behind me. But this guy's smart. One, he's using screw-in pegs. I don't even know if that's legal in West Virginia. He's using screw-in pegs, but he took it, like, taking the bottom 3 or 4 out so he couldn't get into here. But anyway, I was like, you know what? I already hiked all the way in here. There's really good rubs in here. It looks like incredible. Deer blow out all the time for stupid shit. And like, just because you blow one deer out doesn't mean there's not going to be other deer in the area. So I sat down, hunted till dark. Well, actually I didn't hunt till dark. I hunted till 5 o'clock because I was thinking, okay, I need to find where these deer are feeding. I know I jumped that deer on an Oak Ridge flat early in the morning, the second day in the rain. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to walk out in the best 45 minutes to be hunting. The last 30 to 40 minutes of daylight, I'm going to be walking out. So I get up on this logging road, which is at that 1,200 foot elevation. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I figured it. I didn't figure it all out, but I got a lot of really good intel because I was getting pissed of not getting opportunities at deer. So I hike up to that 1,200 foot elevation where there's a logging road. My phone's about to die. I got like 2% on my phone. So I had to take this logging road. It's like 2 miles all the way out. And I'm trying not to get fucking lost is what I'm trying to do. And in the daylight, so I can see the turn I need to take because I knew I wasn't going to recognize it because I had only come in there in the dark in the morning. So I probably wasn't going to recognize it if it was dark and I had no flashlight, no nothing. So I started hiking out. But what I started doing was bumping all these deer just below that fucking road, which is at 1,200 foot, just below that road feeding on oaks or acorns, like under oak trees. So I hike up to the first one. I bumped the same 4 deer. I'm pretty sure I bumped out of the bottom. They were feeding there off to the side. They take off 2 does and 2 fawns. I'm like, cool. So I hiked that road out, and then I bump another singular deer, and I'm like, okay, singular deer this time of year, that could be a buck. Bump that deer at same kind of thing, just below the road, about 20-30 yards below the road, feeding on oaks on the leeward side of the ridge. I'm like, okay. So I'm like making notes on my 1% on Onyx. I get almost all the way out to the end, and I actually hit an access gate that you could physically drive to, and just below it, there's like 4 deer feeding. I can't see them because it's like right at that last bit of light, but I can hear them running around down there. And I'm like, okay, cool. So this is what's going on. They're feeding at night at this elevation because the whole time Logan's been hunting high, I've been hunting high, and we're just not getting on deer. And that day I bumped some deer way down in there that were bedded, and then they're feeding below this line that, well, I didn't think they were feeding that low. To be honest, I thought they were going to be up on these oak ridges or flats and stuff, and they just weren't there is what we were running into. And I was like, okay, cool. At least I got some intel. If I would have done this the first freaking day, I feel like I would have been tagged out, or I would have been at least shooting a buck in our 7 days. I'm not going to say I would have been tagged out early, but I felt like I would have been on deer. So that was the end of my day 6. I get back to the car, finally find Logan. I actually drive up there to where he's parked, and that's the end of our day 6. And then we got 1 day left, so
Half day.
half day?
Yeah.
We hunted till dark.
Oh, I thought we left Monday. That was Sunday.
Yeah, we did leave Monday,
Yeah.
but at dark. We left like 20 minutes before dark. On
Oh,
Wednesday,
yeah. Because we were hiking back. I
Yeah,
forgot
yeah.
about that.
Yep.
So Monday, that was our last full day. That local, so that would be the 21st. Yeah, so that local guy that I spoke to, he was kind of telling me about this. It was in the reclaimed strip mines. There's a thick spot where it kind of like branched up, and then it was like really young stuff up top, but it was thick like autumn olives in one section and more like mature timber in this other finger. But they kind of made like a Y into this bigger bottom, not much of a bottom, but it's kind of like an overlooked spot. No parking was really right there. There's a lot of parking if you follow the road up to other spots for public land. And so it was just kind of like a Hail Mary shot in the dark, or like crawl into this thick autumn olive area. He said he picked up a lot of sheds in there over the years, some nice ones. There's rubs in there, there's trails in there. He didn't really specifically say any beds, but I was like, yeah, I'll give it a go. Like, I haven't seen deer on most of my hunts. I'll give it a try, why not? So I was hiking in there. It was I just waited for just as it was kind of like enough to see, because I had no clue what the area was like, and I've gone on hunts and been successful walking in like gray light and as things are like becoming daylight. But so I was just kind of like easing in there, going as quiet as I could. Everything, the ground was still wet from, we had some rain or something. Snuck in there. Really didn't see much for sign at all as far as anything goes. There's faint trails here, maybe here or there. Found maybe 2 like real tiny rubs. But sat there till 10:30, and like while I was sitting there, somebody was running dogs. I didn't know for what, but I could hear dogs working around this one point and then back behind me, and kind of like looped around back. And I was like, I didn't have a problem with that. I figured maybe they'll bump up a deer, maybe that's bedded somewhere else, and like push it my direction. So I kind of waited till that was pretty much over, and they started heading back the way they came, and I got out. It was, again, my second encounter with some locals there in West Virginia. 2 very nice people. They were rabbit hunting. They had shotguns, and I guess the girls hunted before, and the guy doesn't really hunt, but he said he bumped 2 like really solid 8-pointers, like 2 of some of the biggest deer he's ever seen. Just big, good mass, typical 8-point frames, he said. But I was like, yeah, how long ago was that? Because I was all interested. And he was like, it was about 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, 4 weeks ago would have been their rut. So that was that. They probably still could have been in the area. I actually, as soon as I got out of the thick stuff I was, before I really introduced myself to those 2, I found a couple like really big deer tracks. Maybe it was elk, I don't know, it didn't seem that big, but 4-finger tracks in the mud there, which got me excited, and he told me about those 2 big 8-pointers that were together. So that was pretty much that hunt. Went back to my car, grabbed my cell cam, because nothing really else showed up on that, and then in the rest of the day, I was kind of basically an adventure walk. I was gonna go check the bottom of the hollow where that buck I bumped that one day. That was about an 18-inch spread or so. Not real high tine, but a decent spread on him. I went to walk kind of that bottom in that area, and where we've been seeing a lot of these doe and the concentration of deer, but just I was gonna loop this tip of this finger, which I kind of walked before, and good feeding sign there. Figure it was doe, that's why I walked by it before and didn't really think much of it. Bumped 2 doe up pretty much right from the parking lot. Bumped 3 more doe off the tip of that ridge, and they shot back farther on the ridge. And then I went down and then followed like a little creek, which there's no access in this other bottom, but there is a road somehow, but there's no like parking. It's all private. I guess private could walk up in if they wanted to. But walked that all the way up, came to a split in a creek, followed one of the fingers up, steep side, really looping all the way back almost to where I originally parked, just on like that closest ridge system, where I knew there was some good feeding sign, and there was bedding on, I set up, there was bedding on either side of me, and I think I bumped 1 more doe before getting there. But it was cool. I was like up on this rock ledge that dropped off 20 yards or so, and I could look in almost to both bedding areas, and there was solid trails on both sides of me. Waited there, just the wind started howling, it started beating down rain. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna sit till 5:15, till last light, or what, it wasn't quite last light, till I'm gonna finish this hunt out, it's the last evening or whatever. But it was like 4:30, and I was getting pounded with rain. I was like, screw this. I'm like, whatever. And I texted Logan. I was like, I'm looking at the weather report. It looks like it's not supposed to stop. I think I'm heading back to the car. And just as he like responds to text, I forget what he said, it stopped raining. I was like, I think because he wasn't set up too far from me, which I ended up finding a little bit later. And I was like, screw it, I'll just sit here, because it kind of like died off real quick. It was still windy. I was like right on the very top of the ridge, but didn't see anything. And again, we were gonna just do like a little bit of soft bump. I was gonna head back his direction because we were kind of on the same ridge system, and there was bedding. I could walk right back towards them, so that's what I did. And again, I found good buck sign, which I already walked through before, but didn't bump anything to him. And he was loaded. When I got to the spot where he was, it was just loaded with like highways, like deer highways. The ground was soft, which was a great help for us while we were there. I think we were blessed with some really good weather, and that helped finding sign, and like the tracks stuck a little bit longer instead of just being hard, dry ground. But yeah, no deer. We made some sandwiches, and I hit the road pretty much, drove straight through all the way back to Danville, 7.5 hour drive. Pretty dicey roads on the way home. As far as snow goes, it was coming down pretty hard. People had their flashers on, but everybody made it back home safe, which was good, so he can finish up his day.
So my day 7 was probably my best day, honestly. So I'd been talking about it because we got like 3 days of south winds in a row. So second day we had that south wind, and then the last 3 days we had a south wind. And I'd been talking about going back in and setting up on that original oak bench where I got that shot at that small buck. And finally I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna do it. So Logan was hunting over at that other spot where that guy tipped him off, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna hike up in there. I don't really want to carry the fucking saddle up there, but I'm gonna do it because it's gonna pay off. It's gonna be worth it. So I hike it all the way up in there, kind of get turned around in the dark a little. I'm a little further to the south on this ridge than I want to be. Finally, I literally stumble across the part, literally the spot where I shot at that deer, and I was like, oh, Eureka. Just hiked up 50 yards and hoofed it 10 yards to the right, and I was there. So it was like perfect. Get up in a tree, getting set, and all of a sudden I just hear something crashing behind me. I'm like, fuck, dude. Here we go again, blowing deer out in the dark. And I'm like, what the hell? So it starts to get light, and then I start to realize, like, it wasn't a deer at all. Somehow I bumped back into a different flock of turkeys 4 or 5 mountain ridges away, and they were roosted in the trees right above me. And there's probably like, I think there was 7 of them, you know, just all morning I'm like dodging, trying not to get shit on, because you can just hear them taking loads, like dropping deuces. As I'm sitting there.
Selfie, Snapchat video, I think.
Yeah,
Like right above them.
Yeah, they were right above me. So I'm like, you know, taking pictures of them. And eventually, it's like 8:10. You know, it was actually later than I thought it would be. It was pretty light till they finally flew down. But they flew down. I throw the camera on them. I'm filming them. And they go up over the ridge. And I probably should have made note to the way they exited this basin. They go up this cart road, up over the top, hug the left side of the peak, and out of my life. And so I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to sit. Logan has pushed me to sit longer in the morning because I hate sitting in the morning. I'll sit 7 hours in the afternoon. If I make it 3 hours in the morning, I'm having a good day. Like light time. 3 hours in the light. So I'm sitting there. It's like 9:30. And I just happen to look up on that ridge top. And skyline, I finally see some legs. So this is like the first time I'm seeing deer while actually hunting this entire trip, I believe. Where I didn't bump them in the dark. I'm actually seeing them in daylight. I'm sitting. I didn't jump them or like just happen to see them before they saw me. I'm actually sitting in my saddle. See this deer up on the ridge. Sick. Turn the camera on. Throw the camera on him. I'm filming this deer. Comes down off the ridge. I can tell it's a doe. I throw the binos on it anyway. Then a fawn comes down. I'm like, cool. I'm like, this is dope. I'm like, finally seeing deer. I'm like, I'm not going to get shot here. I don't even have a doe tag. So I'm not like sweating. But then all of a sudden there's another deer. And I'm like, well, what is that? And I throw up my binos on. I'm like, oh, it's a buck. I'm like, okay, it's up on the ridge and like the sun's behind it. I'm like, okay, it's a pretty small buck. Like probably smaller than the one I shot at. And then I like throw the camera on it and I like zoom in and it comes off the ridge top and I'm like, hey, that's a pretty decent buck. Probably like, you know, not huge, 110, 115-ish range. And I'm like, well, fuck this, it's day 7. I haven't had a buck in range in 6 days. Not one since I've been hunting, like actually hunting. I'm smoking this dude if he comes my way. And he comes down off the top, and I noticed that doe started trotting, and he would not leave that doe. Like, he got right on her and started pushing her. And I'm like, okay, well, it makes sense. She still has a fawn with her. Maybe she came into estrus late. Maybe this is that secondary rut that we're seeing, and this is one of the 10%ers that came in late. And they work off this ridge. And it was funny, the way they came down, hit a little bit of bench, worked between, because there's this finger ridge that comes out, but it's surrounded by houses. Again, it's the end of the ridge. And they went out there and worked out on that ridge. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, didn't think much of it. But I'm looking on Onyx, and I'm like, there's not really anywhere for these deer to go. So I kind of got burned earlier in the season in North Dakota where a hot doe came through, and like 5 bucks came through, like would hit her trail and come flying through, and I never moved. I mean, it worked out in the end, but like, so I was like, well, hell, if she's hot, I'm not going to continue to sit here. I got down in the saddle, hoofed it on up to the top of the ridge, and sat there for an hour on her trail. Like, it was a pretty good setup, I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty proud of myself. And yeah, nothing came through. I'm like, okay, here's what I gotta do. I am leaving as soon as it gets dark today. I have to still go over to the other ridge and pull all 4 of those cameras. So I'm like, shit. So I run down the hill, pull my set, hoof it down to the truck, get down to the truck, strip pretty much, get in a tank top because I'm sweating so bad. Get in a tank top, throw all my shit in the truck, fly over to the other spot. It's like a 15-minute drive. Get over there, and it's like 11:40. And I'm like, all right, I want to be back over at the other spot by 1:30, the latest. If I'm not there by 1:30, I'm probably not going to make it up there in time. So I fly up this hill, and I'm like hoofing it. I end up like taking my tank top off. I'm down to nothing. You know, like I literally dropped my thermals. I'm in a pair of 511s, shirtless, carrying my bow and a backpack, and I'm just hoofing it. And like in my head, I'm like, there is no one else out here doing this shit. Because at this point, I'm like running off willpower. Like I'm spent, like because I did that mountain in the morning. I'm over here doing this mountain, and the game plan is if this camera pull sucks, I'm going back to that mountain and have to get up that mountain all before 1:30. So it's, you know, it's like total, if we look at the actual elevation change for the day, I'm looking at 3,600, 5,600 for the day. And I'm like, okay, or 4,800 for the day. Just an elevation change. Gain, 32, somewhere in there. So anyway, hoof it the fuck over there, get up there, all pumped to pull all 4 of these cameras, pull these 4 cameras, all nocturnal.
New buck though.
New bucks. Yeah, new buck. Totally different buck. I showed Logan the buck. He thinks it's a 3.5-year-old buck. Pretty wide. Mm-hmm. Not very high tines. Not super
good amount of tines. Is he 6x6 or 5x5?
Yeah, he was a 5x5. But like, just not a very mature buck. It's all nocturnal. I did get a small bear on film too. But I was like, okay, cool. But I did see that one big buck work a scrape. I had set the one camera over a scrape that was open that was pretty fresh, and he did work the scrape. He came in and pissed on it and everything. But anyway, so I pull down, run over to the other spot, haul ass back up there, and I kind of jacked up by not like giving Logan a heads up, because I talked to Logan the night before, and he's like, yeah, I'm going down this ridge, up over, or what is it? I'm going to park here, go up over the ridge, down in the next spot.
The up-down.
The up-down. He talked about doing it. He's like, I think I'm going to do the up-down. And I was like, okay, cool. So I didn't even bother telling him. Like, I had told him I'd film that buck because I sent him videos. But I hadn't told him, like, hey, whatever you do, please just do the up-down. So
yeah, I ended up changing my plans anyways.
Yeah. So his plans changed.
He's like, did you walk in this area? He sends me a screenshot of his Onyx. He's like, and he has this like these
it's
acres.
83 acres.
83 acres. I'm like, do you walk any of this? I pretty much did a circle through, or like a C through that, because I walked that like the edge of that ridge and then back down the other side. So he's like, "Oh fuck."
Yeah.
Like,
So
whatever.
here's
I probably
my.
drove him to him.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what happened.
Which
But
I don't
anyway,
think
my
so.
whole game plan was run back over there, get set up. Hopefully that buck feeds out the same trail he went in. But anyway, so I get back over there. I'm done. I totally underestimated my ability to just run right back up that mountain. It took me twice as long to get back up there. I'm freaking hurt, and that's the third mountain I'm going up for the day, and I'm power walking all of them. And I get up there, and I'm looking at Onyx, and there's supposed to be a wind change, and I'm like, I don't want to press in too soon. This is before I even text Logan about going in this area, because I just got service again. I'm sitting there, and it sounds like there's squirrels fucking around up above me higher on the ridge. So I'm like, you know what? Just in case, throw an arrow on, throw my release on, step around behind this big tree. And no joke, less than a minute and a half later, 4 does walk by me at like 25 yards, funnel off to my left through that same bowl, walk right by where I was going to go, and get on that same deer trail that buck and that doe and fawn were on that morning, working out that ridge. So for whatever reason, that ridge is very promising. That basin, because Logan came down through and he saw the deer trails, they just funnel through there. And whatever's out on that tip, because Logan didn't go up on the ridge top, he just worked down below it.
I did actually crest that ridge tip, and there is loaded with feeding sign, and I actually bumped like 3-4 doe off it.
Yeah.
Back his direction, but those deer were going opposite of what he was seeing. So
it was
you were
all
seeing new
mixed.
Deer than I was.
Yeah,
sure.
it was totally different than what I was seeing in the morning, but for whatever reason it holds deer. Logan pushed it off that night, and that was it. That was the end of the West Virginia trip. We hunted hard. Fucking sucked. Didn't shower for 7 days. Ate at Chef's, or was it Chief's?
Chiefs, like
Not
3
Chef's.
nights.
Ate at Chief's 3 nights in a row. 4 total, I think. They make a nasty meatloaf. Yeah, they were the sponsors of this trip. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it was fun. It was just like hard hunting, and I mean, I know I took a lot away from it. I mean,
What did you take away from
So,
it?
like, the
we
thing-
should regroup, or
yeah, let's pull back here. So like,
conclusion. What were
I
your
know we were
takeaways?
talking about it afterwards. What would, if like going back, what would we do differently? So for me, what I would personally do differently is what I did on day 6. The evening of day 6, I got on that main road at last light. Well, not last light, like 30 minutes before last light, and just power walked. You know, like when you're trying to creep and you startle deer, they take off, they bum pretty fast. But when, you know, like, have you ever just walked fast, not giving a shit? And like you can like almost walk right up on deer.
Yeah.
It's like they're like not expecting something to come up on them that quick. I wish I would have done that day 6. I mean, that what I did day 6, I wish I would have done that day 1.
As far you're saying scouting wise.
Yeah, scouting
just
wise.
like speed scout.
Yeah, just speed scout, but like not like throughout the entire day. I wish I would have planned on speed scouting right there during prime time, because I think it would have given me a good idea right off the bat where these deer were coming to feed in the evening time. Like what kind of, what elevation they're feeding at, what kind of terrain features they're going to be feeding on, and just yeah, I think that's what I would, if I could do one thing differently on day 1 that I learned from the whole trip, I wish I would have done that right away, because it would have totally affected the way I would have set up to hunt every night. I would have been like, okay, cool, this is what I saw that first day. I'm just going to keep picking these oak basins or bowls until it comes together, and I am going to hunt out of a saddle. I think that's what I would have done different right off the bat.
Anything else?
As far as taking away, other than that,
what about your whole approach to hunting a new property? I mean, you use cameras. Would you put them all out day 1? Like, you only had 1 out for half the trip, I feel like, and then you put all out like the second to last day.
Yeah, I know that's definitely something that you had brought up, that's what you do. First day, go through. I'm not trying to steal what you're saying.
Good.
But like, come through that first day, put all your cameras out. Yeah. Just try to like see what's in the area, kind of pattern. And I would do like kind of the same thing. I would definitely do that going back, because I wish that first day I would have put out more cameras. But it was just like one of those things where I ran out of light. But yeah, I definitely would have put out probably all my cameras. But I think what a big game changer is, even though I don't have one, and even though yours didn't really like produce anything crazy, I would definitely want to do it with cell cams. just so I don't have to walk in there to be disappointed.
Yeah.
You know, like if I put a camera out for a 24, and I was gonna do a 24-hour pull, and I walk up in there and there's nothing, I'd have been pissed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if like there was, let's say there's nothing in the 24, all right, well, I'm not missing anything by walking in there to pull that. I'm gonna push it to a 48-hour pull. All right, cool. Now there's deer showing up on camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I probably would have adjusted my like trail camera strategy a little, looking back on it now. But yeah, I don't know. I just felt like we were checking those ridges, we were looking at those benches, I was hitting those leeward sides. It just wasn't producing the way I thought it was gonna. What would you do differently?
So for me, like he already touched on, I'd say not day one, because I didn't really get a good vibe on day one with like how things were laid out and what I was seeing. So day one, technically I wouldn't have put cameras out, but if I was having that good vibe like I did day two on day one, I would put cameras out as soon as I possibly can, just to see where bucks were or where they weren't. Even though I like that old buck sign, I don't know. I think for starters, I wouldn't go in the early season where there's not much buck sign at all. And I wouldn't go late season where there's only old buck sign, they're not laying down any new sign. Because you really can't tell what's buck and what's doe. Like some stuff I saw was fresh feeding sign, I just like didn't care because I was like, yep, this is doe. There's little doe beds here. There's some scat that it just looked like doe shit. So one, I would say go during the rut or even October.
Pre-rut.
Perfectly, like even like mid-October, perfectly fine. I killed a buck in PA in mid-October, and there's laying down enough sign that you can like locate bucks, and it's not like all over the place like it is during the rut. But so anytime bucks are actively laying down sign. Two would be putting out cameras as soon as possible on active buck sign. Late season, it's still kind of tough. And three would be I bumped that buck on day two, and that was the only real intel I had on a buck besides those two I saw glassing that one day. So I would have just tried to focus in more on that area. And I mean, I did hunt it that a couple days later on that Saturday when I shot that doe, but I feel like I should have like pounded that area within a mile, which would have been nothing for us, as many miles as we were putting on. Like if I looked on every feature within a mile of where I bumped that deer, I feel like I would have bumped them another time or had some encounter with them. I feel like they don't travel all that much late season, and I didn't really spook them that hard. Different weather, maybe I probably would have just sat there, tried to put a stock on them, but I was in rain gear and it was like it was quiet because it was rainy, but also like I would brush against stuff and it would just be like shh. So I was like, I'm never gonna be able to like sneak up on this deer. He didn't bump hard. So those are my three takeaways. Overall, it was my first out-of-state hunt. Got a doe. I'm very pleased. Weather was good. Yeah, it rained that one day, but it could have been a lot worse. Your worst day is always the day previous, I think. There's some ups and downs typically, but it was good. Logan was a good partner to have. He stayed motivated the whole time, even not seeing deer, and he got excited and had cameras and he found that shed. But good worker. It was good to stay in his truck. He's done it a time or two before this, and I'd like to go on another hunt with them. And I definitely go back to those same areas, hopefully during the rut or even October, because we have this intel. Like it'd even be more perfect if we went just next year, because those deer probably aren't gone and things aren't going to change that much from one year to the next. But yeah, I see some future hunts down the road with us, out-of-state hunts most likely. So yeah, that was my takeaway.
Yeah, I would definitely say, like, if we talk about different season, like different time of year, 100% I do things a little bit different. 100%. Because like I love that last week of October. Just like that pre-rut, right before things get real hot and spicy, favorite time to hunt. Like, there's at that point, your bucks are laying good sign, but like you were saying, it's not crazy and sporadic. Like, they're laying good sign, but it's almost like a systematic approach to it, and I feel like that's even though it's not like your primary times to like pattern deer, which is normally like your earlier season, and your later season, which is primarily your patterning times, but at that point you can really get on some systematical like rut sign, even though it hasn't quite kicked off yet, at least in my experience. That's what I've seen. But yeah, like Logan was saying, when I'm saying like put cameras out first day, I'm not going to put cams out obviously if I don't feel good about it. Like Logan, where he ended up the first day, he was like, fuck this, I'm not coming back over here. I'm not just going to throw cameras in a place that I feel stupid, just because. But that's what I felt like a lot of this trip was, just like, all right, let's go scouting every day, because you had to X off all these giant areas that just didn't have deer in it. Like, I think I spent at least 2 to 3 of like 2 to 3, probably 2 full days worth in pointless areas. But you just don't know until
hunting or scouting.
Scouting. But you just don't know until you get in there and actually put boots on the ground. Where Logan was originally, trash. Where I went on the 3rd day or 2nd day, it was day 3. Well, the creek wasn't bad, but like once I got way down in there where I was seeing like, oh, there's a ton of sign here. And then I came across that bait pile. I'm like, okay, clearly this is not a natural sign. I'm not going to hunt anywhere near this. This bullshit. So yeah, so that kind of like X'd out a lot of that area, because like way upstream of that, not very good. But my 3rd day, when I got way back in there, past is when Logan was taking a piss. But way back in there, where I was hopping back and forth between the private and public, like dropping down the bowls, and I did that big loop, and I had to drop way into this bottom. Waste of time. But you just don't know until you go there. Because on a map, you're like, oh, that looks just like this does over here, and it probably has the same kind of sign, and there's probably less people doing it because it's a pain in the ass to get there, only to get there and it not be what you think it is, because maybe someone can just, because there is private up against, someone just drives right the fuck up in there. And yeah, it just didn't, I don't know. It looked like it should have been good on map, wasn't good on map. So obviously throw cameras where there's good sign, and I'm probably going to do that speed scouting thing right in that primo time, right at first light, run through there, see where deer are going to be in the morning. Yeah, I'm going to bump deer, but I'm planning on bumping deer. And then I do it in the evening in a different area, just plan on bumping deer, but trying to get some good intel. But that's what I would do. But yeah, Logan and I are definitely going to be on some hunts. Maybe not next year, but definitely in the future. Just really depends where we're at. But yeah, it was a great time. It was fun. Yeah. Yeah, Logan kept me going. Definitely with the one day he woke it was like, I don't know, I hadn't seen deer in like 2-3 days at this point. And Logan woke up freezing cold every morning and just would like scream like Whitetails or some shit and jump out of the truck, go start his cross track and just take off. And I'm just like, all right, dude. Hey, whatever floats your boat. Like, I'm just out here because this shit sucks. Like, I'm gonna get it done. Like, I'm just too determined once I've set my mind to it. But yeah, so Logan had great energy the whole time. Good to go. Logan would probably take a pistol if we went back next time, I would guess, because he was freaking about black bears all the time. Yeah. There was so much black bear sign there. I don't know how we didn't physically run into one. No. Going through the shit we were going through.
Yeah. You had one on your camera.
I had one on my camera. And at first I honestly thought it was a raccoon because it was so small and it was so close to the camera. I'm like, oh, a raccoon. And then it backed up. I was like, oh, that's a small bear. But yeah, there's surprisingly a lot of bear sign, and we just never really got into them. But then again, there was a fuck ton of deer sign, and we just never really got into them.
If I had my camera on my doe carcass, there would have been a bear. There was so much deer shit in that, or not deer shit, bear shit in that area, like more than I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Hey guys, thanks for checking it out. This has been a long video. I already see we're over 2 hours. So if you feel like watching it, watch it. If you don't, fuck off.
I thought you were cutting it up.
Cutting what up?
This.
Yeah, probably not. It's probably gonna go in there straight. Just because there's a lot of shit that's gonna go in it. But yeah, so guys, thanks for watching. I'm sure we'll do more like this.
Comment, like, subscribe.
Yeah, thanks Logan. Definitely do that. And thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a good night.
Later.
We're gonna go to sleep.
Sick.